I'm here today with Dougal Shaw, who is a business reporter for BBC News, where he's covered business and tech stories for nearly a decade. He set up the entrepreneurship video advice series, CEO Secrets, for the BBC in 2015, containing practical advice and inspiration from business leaders. And the videos run on the BBC's rolling news channels, the BBC News website, and social media accounts. The series now also runs in a radio and podcast format for BBC World Service, and he's turned it into a book of the same name with Bloomsbury Business. So first of all, welcome, Dougal.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Great to have you. And I think you have all the formats there, don't you? Like all the formats.
Yeah. We cover everything. It started out just as a sort of digital specialty product, mainly the idea being that it would be for social media, for sort of Instagram and Facebook, the series. But then it's just kind of evolved out from there and slowly, taken on every kind of platform going, really.
And that is fascinating, isn't it? Because we're used to the BBC. When I was growing up, BBC did big set pieces. It was broadcast media. It was, you knew exactly what you meant by a BBC program. I mean, the proliferation of ways in which the BBC gets its content out now are astonishing, and you've really leapt on that, haven't you? What was the genesis of this?
Well, you're right about this stuff having to be everywhere, because really to be a journalist now, you kind of have to be multi-platform. So the kind of barriers have gone down, where in the past you might think I'm a radio specialist, I'm TV, or I'm at the BBC you couldn't even be a written journalist 20 years ago. Now you can because of the online website. But there were kind of silos between things. But now the technology has changed so much, and the expectations, that every time you do a story, I was saying the other day, you love the story at the beginning, but you're almost tired of it at the end, because you've done the kind of 12th version of it. You've done the TikTok version, the Instagram version, the TV version. You've got to serve all these platforms. Which I love it, because I'm a creative, and I see that as a very positive thing. But when CEO Secrets started, it was back in 2015, and as I said, the idea then was they wanted new digital formats, and actually it came about through a job interview. And like so many businesses, and maybe even books as well, it was kind of adversity that created the opportunity. Because my job was under threat in 2015, and I was a bit worried about what I would do next. I was working as a technology video journalist doing technology stories, and I loved it, but they were going to close that role. But then they advertised this one in the business team, saying we need someone to come up with new formats for things like Instagram, reach young audiences. Facebook was big at the time as well, videos for Facebook. You can apply for this role. So I applied for it thinking, I really want this job. The stakes are high. And I brainstormed, and one of the ideas I had was for the CEO Secrets series. And the idea was that I'd been sitting in the newsroom, so I knew that the business team every day basically would have very big, well-known CEOs coming in, and it would be like kind of star spotting, because you'd go, oh, there's Sir James Dyson, or there's isn't that the CEO of Sainsbury's, I think, over there. They would come in to do live TV interviews about their latest, quarterly results or shareholder meetings, announcements and stuff. So I thought, wow, that's amazing access to this human capital we have here, these people coming in. But what more can we do with it? Could we film something which is a bit more kind of personal, off the cuff advice, by just grabbing them by virtue of the fact that they're here in person? And so that was the idea I pitched at the interview. They really liked it. I got the job, and day one, I just started making it, because I was already a multi-platform journalist who could film and edit and do all the practical stuff myself.
It's brilliant. You have just basically described the sort of the holy trinity of entrepreneurialism. It's the sort of being up against it, having access
Yeah.
to the resources that you have and spotting the opportunity there, and having the skill set to bring to that to do something nobody else can do. I mean, it's entrepreneurial, right? Intrapreneurial, perhaps.
Within an organization, I think you call it entrepreneurial, which the BBC is its own kind of little world, but it is actually quite competitive. And starting a series and trying to build it up is just like starting a
Yeah.
business. And you've got to do things like make your prototype, improve it, show it to people, find stakeholders who'll support you, iterate. All these things are the same within that ecosystem. But the starting point was, adversity, thinking, hang on, the status quo can't continue, my job's going, I need to apply for something else. That moment of failure or adversity can almost provide the kind of activation energy you need to start something new.
Which is a really profound point, and I think recognised by pretty much every entrepreneur, you need a galvanizing event, don't you? It's like the hero's
Yeah.
journey. There's the inciting event. And that the question that you had, just tell us a little bit about what, I mean, it's such a simple question. And I can just imagine that the way in which it's received is so different to perhaps a more adversarial, tell us about the results. What does this mean about your policy for, all that kind of stuff. So what do you ask them and how does that work when they're answering it?
Well, it has evolved over time, but I suppose there's always the core question which we're going to ask the person, which is what's the advice you wish you had starting out? Or we evolved it slightly into, can you tell us a short anecdote story that summarizes a kind of light bulb moment you had in business? Just because stories are very powerful
Mm.
ways to convey advice. In the early days of the series, when nobody knew about it, and we were literally collaring people, and sometimes without much warning, and saying, do you want to, would you do this? And because it is quite a positive thing to do, and they didn't feel they were being ambushed, it was, yeah, they often would do it. But I really wouldn't have very much time with them. And to be honest, looking back at the early ones, they did give off the cuff answers, which were genuine answers. But over time, I now spend at least an hour with the CEO, and it's a longer interview, and so I think you can coax more details and get more profound
Mm.
information out of them. But still, I still ask them now, even now, those core simple questions, and sometimes that yields the core bit of advice that's going to be in the video and in the write up that we do from it, or the radio. But sometimes it happens that you actually have to dig quite deep, because when you first say to someone, if you do ambush them about what's the advice you wish you had starting out, you tend to get the same things, which is follow your passion. It's all about the team you build around you, and be obsessed with your product and the customer. So, but I mean, and just because everyone says it, that doesn't mean
Doesn't
it's
mean
not
it's not
true.
true, but it's not a great series if everybody's saying the same thing. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's a very short run series. So now what I do is, I like to see it as a bit of a kind of psychologist meeting, where you really have a long conversation with the person, ask them lots of open questions, let them tell their story. And I always think to myself, I'm trying to find what's unique about their business journey, their background, what's unique, but trying to find something from that which is universal, so that everybody will find it interesting on some level.
That's so
So the two
interesting.
U's.
And that's the perfect story, isn't it? I mean, I'm thinking about this from the perspective of a business book writer as well, because it's exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to impart advice that will be useful for, well, I won't say anybody, but certainly all the readers that you're targeting with this book. But in order to, the vehicle for that is typically a story or an experience, or
Yeah.
it's an exemplar of how that works out. So one without the other is a bit lame.
I mean, the range of advice we've got in the interviews is vast, and it's interesting as well. You also know how well they perform, because when they go on the BBC News website, we have very good analytics. You know what's being clicked, how
Yes.
long people are staying with a story, all that kind of stuff, which obviously you don't get with a paper book. Um, but the ones that tend to do best are the ones where you've, partly down to you as a journalist, you've picked out a good headline and a good sell and a good picture and all the rest of it. But usually it's advice that isn't too businessy. It'll almost never say the word business, in fact, in the headline. That's quite a turn off. But it will be more kind of like life advice,
Mm,
or at least advice that wouldn't just apply to an entrepreneur, but also to someone who's, say, ambitious at work, because many of us are employees, if not,
yes.
business owners.
And that
So those kind of general ones.
and that was really interesting as to the way you almost identified different types of interviewee. So you noticed a difference between entrepreneurs and leaders in corporates, and also males and
Yeah.
females. Just tell us a little bit more about that, because I thought it was fascinating.
This is kind of how the idea for a book came about, because obviously I didn't think it would ever be a book at the beginning. It wasn't even on my mind. But when the series lasted for a long time, and we probably got into by about 2018, we're 3 years into it and it's still going. You've done enough of them that you start to notice patterns
Mm,
in the people, rather than them just being individual stories. And often as a journalist, you can be a bit too focused on individual stories, and each one is an island and you move on to the next one. But I was always thinking about the series, dwelling on it, because I obviously making the series, I'm passionate about it and it's on my mind. And I did start to just think, well, I do see all these things from this panoramic view I've got from seeing this parade of people, and gender being one of them, and definitely the difference between the people who are founders and the people who've worked their way up the corporate ladder, who I call the corporate climbers. And basically, in essence, the corporate the people who founded their own company would tend to be a bit more extrovert, be open to improvisation. And I'm noticing that behind the scenes as the person who's conducting the videos and filming them, because it will be in things, just their attitude to the recording process. Like, you might have the fundamental choice, where are we going to film this? And I remember this happened a few times. You might have the choice between a striking backdrop in their office, but there's a risk of it being noisy or distractions coming. So maybe, do we compromise? Do we go to the more boring room where it's quiet? The founder entrepreneur is far more likely to be, no, we just go for it, and if I have to stop, we go again. Whereas the corporate climber is a bit more careful, and just in so many small things that manifested itself. Whether it was, one time I had to park somewhere with an entrepreneur, and I was a bit thinking, because I'm quite a careful person, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to park in this space, but the kind of founder's like, no, you just park there, come on, we'll deal with it, happens, and then move on. All these small things. Another big moment actually was someone who is, I've forgotten which company he was, but he was someone who's a corporate climber, head of a very big consumer high street brand, and he was giving his advice, and I thought he was delivering it very well. And then he kind of stopped and he said, "Oh no, wait, no, that's not the words I was meant to use. Hang on." And he pulled out a script, and he'd actually
Wow.
written out exactly what he wanted to say, and he was basically kind of performing what he'd rehearsed. So, and I think what you find with the corporate climbers who've moved up the companies is that they treat every test as a kind of interview, and they have that constant feeling that they're being assessed, that maybe they're not, I don't know, worthy of the role of head of the company because they didn't found it. Whereas the founder entrepreneur has never had an interview for their role, or never had any interview at the company, because he or she has run it from the outset, and it's their kind of creation. So I think they have a different attitude, and they care a bit less about what people around them think.
That's so fascinating. So,
So
as the founder, you can't get it wrong because it's your company. Whatever you say is right because it's your company. There's that kind of identification. I never thought about it like
yeah,
that.
I think I was kind of a bit more drawn to those personalities, but myself, I'm probably a bit more similar to the analytical, careful climber person. But maybe opposites attract, so maybe that's why I found the other one more interesting. But
It's such a
in
fascinating
terms
insight.
of but gender is the other big
Mm.
one that I think struck me after that. Um, and that there was one in particular where it happened. I did an interview with a woman called Alex DePledge, who is an entrepreneur, and she set up her startup was a sort of domestic cleaning service, a platform to book domestic cleaners, and she ended up selling it for several £1 million, exiting, and did very well. And when I went to interview her, I was like, I'm behind the camera because I go myself just to do these things, but I'm filming it and asking the questions. And she was like up and running and talking about her story and her advice. And she said, "Oh yeah, I just found out that I'd got funding from the same people that backed Facebook. It was a huge moment, such a great time for the company. But I was on a ball on the floor, rolling around in tears, saying, 'I don't know how to be a CEO. I don't know how to be a CEO.'" And her husband found her that way. And when she was saying all this, I was kind of like, I forgot I was recording. I was just like listening as a person on a human level. But it was only afterwards that I thought, I just would never expect
Yeah.
someone to reveal that kind of vulnerability. But in general, I found that, and there are exceptions, everyone's different, of course, but there was a trend for the female entrepreneurs to be a bit more open, to tell personal stories and to share moments of vulnerability and how they overcame them in a very inspiring way. And I would say that was their superpower,
Mm.
because they were extremely engaging, brilliant interviews.
And when I read that, I like you, I remember sort of taking an intake of breath and just the rawness of it, but also the
Mm,
courage to share that, because actually, when you have those 3 in the morning moments, they normally are, aren't they? You think you're alone. You think nobody else ever goes through this, and to hear a successful entrepreneur own that, I think is incredibly
mm.
powerful.
Yeah, and hopefully it normalizes
Yeah,
it and removes any stigma from it, and you're
exactly.
a braver, better leader for doing that, I
Yeah,
think.
totally. I want to talk about writing as well, Dougal, because obviously, we talked right at the beginning about the kind of the multi-platform, multi-format way that this has evolved,
Yeah.
and you aren't primarily a writer; you're primarily a broadcast journalist. So, what role does writing play in your life? Do you find it enjoyable? What does it do for you that other forms don't?
I was listening to it was either a podcast or a radio. Actually, maybe even you were on it. Now I think about it, a panel, but it wasn't you that said it. But someone said writing is the best method of thinking ever
Yes.
devised. And I think when I heard that, I thought, wow, that I 100% agree with
I
that.
think it was Margaret
My way
Heffernan,
of,
wasn't it? It was on Radio 4. We were doing a program with Evan
I think
Davis.
you were on with
Yeah,
me,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So that's that's funny. It's come up now, but I think it's almost like you're a sculptor and you're trying to sort of chisel away at your ideas to get them right. And my way of doing it is by writing and rewriting, and that's how I kind of formulate my thoughts and get new thoughts at the same time. And as I was saying before, as when you're in a digital newsroom now, you do it's kind of an equal split, to be honest. My primary role and the thing that makes me stand out is the fact that I know how to film and make and edit and do the videos. But I probably spend, in terms of my output, an equal amount writing, doing radio, and doing video, and I enjoy all forms for different reasons. But actually, in terms of the impact that you can have online as as a journalist at the moment, certainly on the BBC News website, I think it's the written stories you do, which are typically about 500, 600 words for a news story, but maybe up to 1,200 for a longer feature, that really have the most impact
That's interesting.
with the audience.
So where does the book fit into that for you? What does the book make possible, or what does it? How does it fit alongside those other forms?
I'll tell you, I'll tell you the way it came about, because that partly explains it. Basically, I had wanted to write a book for a long time, and a lot of people have that aspiration. Um, and actually, quite a few of my journalist colleagues had started to write books, and that's been a bit of a trend that more of them have been invited to publish, and have gone on to do quite well. But I was actually thinking of writing a completely different book. I'm When it comes to making videos, I'm quite passionate about something called Mojo, which is a hashtag for mobile journalism, and that means filming on your mobile phone. So this is quite a big thing in the last 10 years. It's become more and more popular and more possible as the technology's improved. So I found some publisher, and I thought I'd love to write about this because I love teaching about it as well. So I found some publishers through my journalism contacts and said, what do you think of this idea for a book? How to make viral video hits on your phone. Um, and I had a few coffees with them, with some of the big publishers as well. And that's how I learned how publishing works, where it's a bit like being a journalist. They had that as an idea from me as a collaborator, but they have to convince their
Mm,
colleagues. So they go to commissioning meetings. And so they went off of the idea exactly the same way as a journalist. If I've got an idea, I can't just suddenly give it the green light. I've got to persuade my colleagues. So, but the feedback I got on at least two occasions was good enough to take to discussion level, but they didn't think it had broad
yeah.
enough appeal for them to commit to it as a big idea. And then one thing you quickly realize is that these are business
Mm,
decisions. And when they have these meetings, I think it's not just the other publishers, it's also the finance people, the rights
yeah.
specialists, and they're making their projections of how much it will sell and all the rest of it. So obviously that was a bit disappointing, but I thought I was still carrying on trying to write that book. And then it was in the course of those discussions that I spoke to someone from Bloomsbury Business, and he said, well, what other stuff do you do? And or he knew that I did CEO Secrets. Maybe we discussed that, and the idea just emerged from that. Well, have you thought of turning that into a book?
Because that has got the
And then
breadth
we
of
had
appeal.
yeah, they had obviously they saw it more as a. I mean, I've got no idea what calculations they do in the background, but um, yeah. And then it was a time of COVID when I was having those advanced discussions with them. But the other thing that happened then was I always thought, well, I haven't really got. I work full time. I don't have the time to write a book. But when COVID happened and all the lockdowns, all of a sudden I got about an hour and a half to 2 hours back a day from not commuting. So when it finally got to the point that I got we signed on the line to do the book. I made sure that the thing I was paranoid about was the due date when I sort of you sign that you have to hand it in by a certain date. I didn't want to be caught out
Mm,
and not do it in time. So I think I asked for quite a big extension because I wanted to relax about that. But in the end, I think I delivered it quite a few months ahead of time because I just broke down this 70,000 word task in a spreadsheet into about 60 different blocks, and each day or maybe once, every week you're ticking off 2 blocks to say that, yep, here I had a little column say, this one's 2,000 words, this one's 1,800, and every now and again I would like tot up the total and think, God, how close am I to the 70,000? Because you're just paranoid about getting there, and it seems like a big number when you start, but actually it adds up quite quickly. So by breaking it down, that's how it became possible. And I would do little bits sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the evening. A couple of times I remember I dropped my daughter off at football. It was raining, and while she was training, I just sat in the car and sort of bashed out some words. But as a journalist, I wasn't daunted by the having to write or writer's block, because one, it wasn't a detective novel where you're kind of thinking, oh my God, what happens next? I need to decide. It was quite clear what I had to do. I just had to get this information in a manageable form to create this basically an anthology from the series.
And of course, you had all the headings and you had the word extents. And once you've got that, it's just like, I mean, you have to join them together and you have to do your introduction and conclusion. I'm not
Yeah,
trivializing it, but once you've got the breakdown, you've got a series of jobs in front of you and you can just get on and do them, can't you?
yeah. And I found as well, you find your own rhythm.
Yeah.
That my best time for work is probably the mornings, but when it's like just executing what has to be done, just writing. But my time for like mental breakthroughs might be when you're going to bed, or when you suddenly wake up at 4 in the morning. So that's the time you've got to scribble down little notes to remind you for later on. So you work out your own rhythms, and yeah, eventually, the word count got there. But I hadn't obviously done a book before; it was my first. So Bloomsbury were very good with me with that. They explained the procedure, how it probably goes through about 3 different passes where you hand it in. You get your initial feedback, and typos and stuff are fixed, but you can still make some structural changes at that point. But the further down the line it goes, the less ability you have to change things.
Yeah. Once we've done the index, we don't like to mess around with the pagination.
Yeah, and luckily I don't have to do the index myself or anything like that. But actually, the other thing I found that was interesting was as I said, I broke the book down to make it manageable for me into these sort of 60 blocks. But what that meant was I was looking at each one quite
Mm.
discreetly, and in a sense, it's an anthology, so that's kind of understandable. That's the nature of this particular book. But it was actually probably only after I'd handed in the first initial rough draft that I properly sat down and read it from start to finish and thought, hang on, how does this feel if you experience this
Yeah.
as a one continuous book? And that was very useful, because as I did that, all of a sudden I started making connections I hadn't realized before. So I might add things, because you can still add things at this stage, saying, and what she said there echoes what we learned in chapter 1. And it's all not many sentences like that, but that helps to weave together this bigger tapestry that makes it feel like a more substantial
Yeah.
book.
And then you've got that lovely conclusion at the end that sort of draws out the key themes, which works really well.
Yeah.
I'm really keen to get your best tip. You've actually given us some really practical, helpful, insight into how you did it that other people will be able to absolutely lift and use themselves. But if I was to say to you, what's your single best tip for somebody just starting out on this journey, what would you say to them?
So I think this comes after, because what I've talked about so far is writing the book, but obviously the big thing is what happens afterwards. How you're interested in the book, how do you make other people interested in it? And even though in my case I had a bit of an advantage, because even though my name as an author wasn't known, it was done as a BBC series, so it has like the BBC logo on it. That helps a little bit, but it doesn't. You're not going to have big, huge displays in Amazon, in Waterstones, or on front page in Amazon and stuff like that. You're one of so many books that are released at any given day. So you have to be very sort of humble and realize you're going to have to work and be proactive, perhaps especially for a business book. But the good news I found is that you have to be proactive and deliberate, and and again, a bit of an entrepreneur, I suppose. It's a bit like, I'd say, being a comedian who's trying to build their reputation on the comedy circuit as a business writer. But instead of the comedy clubs, you've got this circuit of entrepreneurship clubs, co-working spaces. There's thousands of these little organizations around the UK, and you have to build a list, find out who your target audience is, approach these people. They love it when people come to give talks. It's good for them as well. And you need to go and meet people face to face. You can do it online ones as well. I mean, they can be effective, but it's hard to know how that translates into sales. But I was surprised as a first-time author that when I went to go and do a talk, people really want to see you at the end. They want to come up and chat to you, and they want to buy a book, and they want you to sign
Yeah.
it. And I felt very sort of, I don't know, a bit of a diva. I'm not like signing a book. I feel a bit silly doing it. But you realize that for people, it's just personalizing the
Yeah.
object, and they want to show they've met you, and it's quite a nice thing to do. So I would definitely recommend thinking about the afterlife of the
Mm.
book, and going out and making sure practice if you don't feel you're good at it, speaking about the
Mm.
book. But you should be passionate about it if you've written the
Right.
book. But be prepared to go out and speak and sell your ideas.
Brilliant. What a great tip. Thank you. And you're right. A lot of people respond to that thinking about the writing of the book, but
Yeah,
that's like phase one. It just sinks into obscurity if you don't pull phase two into action.
yeah, that's when the work really starts, when the
Yeah,
answers
right.
come out.
And because writing it, I mean, it's hard work, but it's really simple in some ways. It's not easy, but it's fairly simple. But oh my goodness, the marketing much more complicated. Um, if I'm going to ask you for a recommendation as well. You're not allowed to recommend CEO secrets. Hopefully
Yeah.
we've done that. But what book have you read recently, or would you recommend that anybody listening should read if they haven't already?
I've got a book to recommend, but before that, I've got a sort of technique, which people are probably doing this already. But anyway, I'll just say it because this has kind of been my life. But I've recently found that I had to catch up on quite a few classic business books because I wasn't a massive reader of the genre before I wrote one, but I've kind of been brushing up since. But I found that listening to them as audiobooks is, for some reason, works very well for business books. So now whenever I go out jogging, I like doing long, slow jogs. I will listen to business books, and I just read Good to Great, which is a classic, but I hadn't got around to reading it. And I hadn't realized that a lot of the music platforms we're on,
Yeah.
in my case Spotify, but there's lots of other ones, have if you search up books, it's amazing the business books on
Mm.
there. And I've compiled a massive list that, if I jog while listening to them all, I'll have gone, around the UK several times probably. Um, but for me, that's a good way to
Yeah.
digest business books. So that's my kind of general little tip if you're not doing it
And hot
already.
tip, you can also
And then
set the speed to 1.2, which enables you to get through more. I find them very slow.
Yeah,
So
I found that good to great, to be honest, because it's great to hear it in the author's own voice. But it made me realize I thought I was a slow reader, but
yeah,
it's so slow when you
you can
listen to them
crank
read
up the
it out.
pace.
Um, the book I want to recommend is actually someone I met on the CEO Secret series. I'm going to hold it. I've actually got it here. The book. I don't know if
Yes. Well,
will that look backwards when I hold it
no,
up.
that's absolutely fine. Brilliant. If you're looking on video, you can see this now, but go and tell us about it for those on
Yeah.
audio.
And also, again, for the audio people, if you were able to see it, you'd see there's so many little kind of folds I've put in the book because there's things and I thought, oh, that's great. I want to go back and read that again. So it is a book called Skin in the Game by Jane Werwand. She is a British entrepreneur born and raised in Scotland, who went on to found Dermalogica, which is a very famous global skincare brand that you'll see in Boots and all the other shops out there. I think she's sold it, but she's the founder of it. And the reason I really like this book is there are some business books where you can kind of tell that it's either been ghostwritten or the person has had a lot of help, and it's very digestible, but the words can be quite
Mm,
bland and the story's quite bland. In her book, and I mean this in a respectful way, it's obviously written by her. It feels really genuine, raw, passionate, and there are some bits where I think that structure is a bit funny. I wonder why she did it that way, but that's how she wanted
yeah.
to do it. You can tell, and it's just the sort of honesty. Maybe this comes back to her being an entrepreneur and not a corporate climber. She built the business herself, but the honesty of her stories is quite arresting. And again, it's about the small little moments she describes. So if you don't know her, she grew up in Scotland at a very young age. Her and her sisters lost her father, so she was raised. Who died suddenly, so she was raised just by her mother in a lot of financial adversity, and that taught her resilience at an early age. She talks as well about moving to South Africa in her, I think, late teens, early 20s, and a failed relationship and all the problems from that. And then she moves to California with a green card and about $1,000 in her bank account, and she explains how she grew the business from nothing to this multi-million pound operation.
Amazing.
But just to take out a couple of moments from it that stayed with me as a reader of the book. So a lot of times as a entrepreneur, we're told, what's your passion? Follow your passion. But how do you actually think? Not everyone knows what their passion is, but she says something very interesting in the book, which is think about what fascinated you between about the ages of 9 and 11, I think it is. So not even you wouldn't even call that a hobby at that age. A hobby is what an adult calls something that you don't make money from. But what did you naturally gravitate towards? And because that's before the exam machine hits you at school, or you have expectations from your parents and all the rest of it. What did you just naturally love doing? And she says for her it was making facials, playing with dolls, doing kind of beauty and cosmetic treatment type stuff, which is what she went on to specialize in. She talks about a friend who used to make photo journals and cut things out and make albums, and became a photographer and a journalist. If I think of myself, like I loved at that age computers and my home computer and trying to write little software programs. And a lot of the journalism I do has been about using technology. So actually, I don't know. Do you have something that you did between that age?
I just remember reading all the time. So it's not actually a huge surprise that I went on to become a publisher and a
Yeah,
writer. So I was just thinking that, yeah, how interesting. Kind of wish I'd been,
that worked.
I don't know, surfing or something that might be a little bit more interesting. But yeah, no, absolutely, you just put me in a book and let me be, and I'll be perfectly happy here for the next 4 hours. Yeah,
Yeah, well, you're in the perfect vocation.
exactly. Yeah.
So I thought that was very interesting. And then um, the other thing she said that I thought was very moving, a nice little anecdote, was when she was in South Africa, working her way up in the salons, and she started, just like sweeping the hairs on the floor and doing the most menial tasks, and then she would do some facials and things like that. She says she was working one day, and she was given a repeat client who was a widow who was, I don't know, maybe in her 70s or 80s, who used to come and she would do her facial. What I think it was like once a week or once a fortnight or something. But she got the impression that this woman didn't have very much money, and I think this is how I recall the story. I haven't reread it, but she said something like to the woman, "Are you sure you want to come this often? It must be expensive. You could maybe come just once a month or something." And the woman said, "Oh, but you don't understand. This is the one time I have any human contact with anyone that somebody touches me." And that's when she realized that the world of beauty and cosmetics and all these things isn't just about appearance. It's about often quite an emotional
Yeah.
connection. And that's kind of helped her to build her business.
Oh,
So I like all these little insights in business books.
yeah. Beautiful. And yes, very moving. Thank you. I didn't know the book, and I will go and seek it out. Thank you. And Dougal, if you want to find you and find out more about you, I know this is going to be going out the 27th of May 2024, and that's
Yeah.
quite an interesting time for you, isn't it? So do you want to give us any insights into where we might be able to hook up
Yeah.
with you?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting time because I'll be leaving the BBC at that point, and I've been there for like coming up to 20 years, quite a long time. And that's one reason why I'm pleased in a way, looking back, that CO Secrets got turned into a book, because I mean, it's not the only thing I've done while at the BBC, but it's one of I suppose, kind of an achievement there. And doing a book from it just kind of solidifies it a bit, and sort of crowns it, even though it began as a digital idea. But the best way to find me is probably these days on LinkedIn. That's where I like to hang out most. So you can find me, Dougal. I think I'm the only Dougal Shaw. One of the benefits of having a rare name.
Good
A
Scottish
little bit
name.
on, yeah, yeah. I'm a little bit on Twitter and the other ones, but mainly it's LinkedIn. That's the best place for me.
Brilliant. Well, I'll hunt you down, and I'll put that link up on the show notes at extraordinarybusinessbooks.com. And what a pleasure talking to you, to find out the genesis of the series and all the sort of the ways in which you've developed it has been really fascinating. Thank you.
Thank you.